The knife tapped rhythmically against the cutting board, each slice of cucumber falling into a neat row. The sound was steady, almost comforting, until Nora Bennett's phone lit up beside the sink. A message from her son Ethan, one photo, a dinner table. Everyone was there, Ethan, his wife Sloane, her parents, and little Milo sitting on his grandfather's lap. Laughter frozen in a frame from the Juniper Room, the restaurant Nora had once dreamed of visiting on her own birthday. She stared at the picture until the steam from the pot blurred her vision. No caption, no invitation, not even a wish you were here. The silence in her kitchen felt heavier than any words could. Nora placed the phone face down and turned off the stove. The house smelled faintly of dill and disappointment. For a long moment she stood motionless, hands trembling slightly. Then she whispered to the empty room. They didn't even think to ask. That realization hurt more than anger ever could. She wiped her hands on a towel, looked around the spotless kitchen she'd cleaned for years, and finally exhaled. Tonight would be the last time she waited by the phone for someone else to include her. After her husband Arthur passed away 5 years earlier, Nora Bennett had moved into her son's house just for a while. Ethan and his wife Sloane had been juggling new jobs, a mortgage, and a newborn. It felt natural to help. She told herself it would be temporary until Milo started preschool, maybe a year at most. Years slipped by like pages in a book no one finished reading. Nora became the quiet rhythm of the household, the lunches packed before dawn, the shirts pressed, the soup simmering before anyone walked in. She was the reason things ran smoothly, yet no one seemed to notice. At first she didn't mind. Helping her family gave her a sense of purpose. Watching Milo grow filled her evenings with laughter and warmth. But lately that laughter had started to sound distant, muffled by closed doors and whispered plans she wasn't part of. Sloane had begun saying we in a way that excluded Nora. We decided to repaint. We thought you'd be more comfortable downstairs. We figured you wouldn't enjoy those parties. Each sentence chipped away at something inside her. Arthur had once told her, families don't always fall apart with shouting. Sometimes they fade with politeness. She didn't understand it then, now she did. That evening, as she washed the last dish, Nora caught her reflection in the dark kitchen window, tired eyes, silver threads in her hair, a woman who had given everything and slowly vanished from her own life. Maybe she had stayed too long. Maybe it was time to stop being the background of someone else's story. The next morning, Nora packed a small roller bag, careful not to wake anyone. She folded her clothes neatly, slid her late husband's watch into a side pocket, and placed a note on the kitchen counter. It read simply, "Gone to stay with Ruth for a few days. Don't worry." She hesitated before signing her name, then added one more line. "Please take care of Milo." Outside, the air was cool and gray. The taxi she'd called idled quietly at the curb. As it pulled away, Nora looked back once at the house she had turned into a home for everyone but herself. Curtains drawn, porch light still on, a symbol of her endless waiting. The ride to Ruth Delgado's apartment took 30 minutes. Ruth, a retired nurse and Nora's closest friend, opened the door before Nora could knock. One look at Nora's face was enough. "You don't need to explain," Ruth said softly. "You can stay as long as you need." They sat at the kitchen table with 2 mugs of coffee between them. Nora told her everything: the photo, the forged distance, the quiet Achim needed but never wanted. Ruth listened, her brow furrowing. "Then tomorrow," she said, "we'll go find out exactly what they've been doing behind your back." Nora nodded. The fear that had clung to her chest began to loosen. For the first time in years, she was no longer waiting for someone to save her. She had finally taken the first step herself. The next morning, Nora and Ruth took the early bus to Maple Court, the old brick building where Nora had lived for nearly 40 years before moving in with Ethan. The neighborhood looked both familiar and foreign. The bakery on the corner was gone, replaced by a sleek cafe with glass walls. Even the air smelled different, like espresso and asphalt instead of rain and bread. When they reached the building, Nora stood for a moment on the cracked sidewalk, staring up at the faded shutters. Her heart clenched. She could still picture Arthur painting that second-floor window himself, whistling off-key while Ethan, 10 years old, begged to help. The lobby was dim and quiet. A notice board hung near the mailboxes, cluttered with leaflets and flyers. But one large document stood out in the center, a printed letter stamped in red, "Notice of redevelopment and demolition." Nora leaned closer. The paper stated that all current property owners had to submit verification forms within 2 weeks to qualify for compensation. Her name was still listed as a joint owner. Her pulse quickened. She turned to Ruth. "No one told me about this." An older neighbor, Miss Lang, shuffled by and paused. "Oh, Nora, I thought you'd moved away for good. Your son came by last week, said you were too ill to handle the paperwork. Such a pity, dear." Nora froze. He said what? Mrs. Lang frowned. He had some documents with him. Told the inspector everything was under control. Nora's fingers tightened around her purse. She felt the air leave her lungs. All those years of trust, and now this a quiet betrayal sealed with her own son's pen. She looked back at the old building one last time. "If they thought I wouldn't come back," she whispered, "they were wrong." That afternoon, Nora and Ruth went straight to the community development office downtown. The building was bright and sterile, the kind of place where every voice seemed to echo. A young clerk in a navy vest greeted them politely and asked for Nora's identification. When she handed over her old deed papers, the clerk scanned them, then typed her name into the computer. "Yes, Mrs. Bennett, your unit is part of the Maple Court redevelopment project. The compensation package for your property is listed at $315,000. Nora blinked. "I never agreed to sell anything." The clerk frowned. "It says here your son submitted authorization forms on your behalf. He provided a power of attorney and signature copies." Nora's stomach dropped. "Can I see those forms, please?" The clerk hesitated but eventually handed her the file. There it was, her name, her handwriting, or at least, something that tried to look like it. The loops were wrong, the slope too sharp. Her voice trembled. "This isn't my signature." Ruth leaned closer, her tone steady but firm. "So what happens if this is fraudulent?" The clerk looked uneasy. "If it's proven false, the sale can't go through. You'll need to file a verification request." Nora nodded slowly, feeling the blood rush in her ears. She flipped through the rest of the folder and noticed a sticky note with neat handwriting. It read, "Basement room for mom close to kitchen, easy access." The words hit her like a slap. That's what her son had planned, a windowless room beneath his new house, while he cashed in the home she and Arthur had built from decades of sacrifice. She closed the file gently, her hands no longer shaking. "Thank you," she said quietly to the clerk. As she walked out into the afternoon light, Ruth caught her arm. "You okay?" Nora looked straight ahead. "No," she said, "but I'm done pretending I am." That evening, Nora sat at Ruth's kitchen table with the papers spread out before her. The numbers, the stamps, the false signature, it all felt unreal, like a cruel trick. For a long time she didn't speak. Then Ruth called her nephew, who worked as a paralegal, and put him on speaker. He listened patiently as Nora explained what had happened. When she finished, his voice was calm and firm. "Miss Bennett, if your name is on the title, your consent is legally required for any sale. A forged power of attorney doesn't hold up in court. You have more power than you think." Nora exhaled slowly. More power than she thought. For the first time, those words didn't sound foreign. Following his advice, she drafted a short letter that night, simple and clear. She revoked any power of attorney that had been filed in her name and requested a full investigation. Ruth helped her scan and send the documents to the office before midnight. When Nora finished, she stared at the sent confirmation on her screen. A strange calm washed over her. She picked up her phone and typed a message to Ethan. "I'll be staying at Maple Court for a few days. I'll handle all future paperwork myself." No anger, no accusations, just boundaries, quiet, precise, unshakable. Ruth smiled faintly. "That's the Nora I remember." Nora looked down at her hands. They weren't trembling anymore. Maybe it's the one I've been waiting to remember too. 2 nights later, Nora returned to Ethan's house to collect a few personal items. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that felt rehearsed. She moved carefully through the hallway, her footsteps soft on the carpet. As she passed by the study, she heard voices, low, urgent, unmistakably Ethan and Sloane. "She's serious," Ethan, Sloane whispered. "If she won't sign, the compensation's going to be delayed for months." Ethan's tone was tense. "I'm handling it. She just needs time to cool off." Sloane scoffed. "We don't have time. The buyer's waiting. If we have to, we'll keep Milo away until she gives in. She'll fold eventually." Something inside Nora cracked. Her breath caught, her pulse racing in her temples. She took one unsteady step back, and her elbow brushed the umbrella stand. The sound was small but sharp enough to freeze the room. The study door opened. Ethan's face drained of color. Mom? For a second, the three of them just stared at each other, Ethan pale, Sloane defiant, Nora trembling. I heard enough, Nora said quietly. Her voice was thin but steady. Don't worry, you'll get what you deserve. Before Ethan could reply, the edges of her vision blurred. A sharp pain shot through the side of her head. The room tilted, then dissolved into darkness. When she opened her eyes again, there was light bright, sterile, and cold. The rhythmic beeping of a monitor replaced the echo of her son's voice. She realized where she was only when she saw the hospital bracelet around her wrist. Her name, printed in black letters, reminded her of the one thing no one could forge, her will to survive. When Nora woke again, the world was wrapped in soft beeps and whispers. The faint smell of disinfectant filled the air. Her body felt heavy, her tongue dry. For a moment she didn't know where she was. Then she saw Ethan slumped in the chair beside her bed, face pale, eyes red from lack of sleep. He noticed her stirring and stood up quickly. Mom, you scared me. His voice cracked, and for the first time in years, it didn't sound defensive, it sounded small. Nora looked at him quietly. I'm fine, she murmured, though the word didn't feel true. A nurse entered, checked her vitals, and smiled kindly. You've got visitors, Mrs. Bennett. Shall I let them in? Two familiar figures appeared in the doorway, Mr. Whitaker, her calligraphy instructor from the community center, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers, and May Turner, his outspoken assistant, carrying a thermos of homemade soup. May grinned. You think a little hospital stay's getting you out of homework? Not happening. For the first time in days, Nora managed a weak smile. Mr. Whitaker placed the flowers on her nightstand. Ink and paper can wait. You just rest, my dear. The world isn't going anywhere. When they left, Ethan watched them go, confused. They're your friends? Nora nodded. People I've known 2 weeks, she said softly, and they showed up. Ethan lowered his head, unable to answer. Respect, she thought, wasn't about blood. It was about who came when you needed them most. 2 days later, when Nora was strong enough to sit up, Sloane appeared at the hospital with a bouquet of expensive lilies and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Ethan trailed behind her, holding a folder. We just want to make things right, Sloane began, setting the flowers on the table. The developers are waiting and you've been through a lot. Ethan and I talked, and we think a fair arrangement would be giving you 20% of the payout. That way everyone benefits. Nora looked at her without blinking. 20%? It's generous, Sloane said quickly. Considering we're doing all the handling, you'd still live with us, of course. We'll take care of everything. Ethan's eyes darted to the floor. He didn't speak. Nora reached for a glass of water, her movements deliberate and calm. Sloane, she said quietly, I don't want what isn't mine, but I also won't give up what is. Sloane's jaw tightened. So you'd rather ruin everything? Nora took a sip, then met her gaze. I'm not ruining anything. I'm setting it right. Silence stretched between them until Ethan finally said, maybe we should go. As they left, Nora turned toward the window. Outside, the city moved on, cars, people, lives intersecting without pause. She didn't feel angry anymore, just clear. Some storms, she realized, were meant to wash away illusions, not people. A week later, the doctor finally cleared Nora for discharge. Her right hand was still weak, but she could walk short distances with support. Ethan came to pick her up alone. The ride home was quiet. Sunlight flashed between the trees as the car moved through the suburbs, and Nora's reflection in the window looked like a stranger, older, yes, but steadier too. When they arrived, the house was spotless. A vase of fresh tulips sat on the dining table, and Sloane, wearing a practiced smile, came out of the kitchen. Welcome home, Mom, she said softly. I made chicken soup. Nora nodded. Thank you. They sat down to eat. The silence was thick but not hostile. Halfway through the meal, Ethan cleared his throat. Mom, we talked about the compensation again. We want to be fair. Sloane slid a printed sheet across the table. 1/3 for you, she said. That's $100,000. The rest goes toward the new house. You'll have your own room upstairs with sunlight. Nora studied the numbers. And the deed? Ethan hesitated. We'll include your name too. Equal ownership. For a moment, no one spoke. Nora looked at both of them, her son, tired but sincere, and Sloane, struggling between pride and guilt. Then we'll do it, Nora said finally. But I'll need something else in return. Sloane's shoulders tensed. What is it? Nora placed her spoon down. My independence. From now on, I live my life on my terms. You take care of your family, I'll take care of me. Sloane looked startled, but Ethan only nodded. That's fair, he said quietly. The next morning, Nora stood in the garden, the soft scent of tulips still hanging in the air. Her cane pressed lightly into the soil as she breathed in the crisp morning wind. For the first time in months, she didn't feel trapped by the walls of her own home. She felt awake. Later that day, Ethan joined her on the porch holding a folder. Mom, here's the final paperwork. The agreement's ready for your signature. But before you sign, he hesitated, his expression serious. Are you sure you're okay with this arrangement? 1/3 joint ownership and living here with us? Nora looked at the horizon, her eyes soft but steady. No, she said simply. Ethan blinked. No? I've been thinking, she continued, turning to face him. I want to use my share differently. There's a senior living community near the Lake Silverwood Gardens. I visited before the stroke. They have calligraphy classes, gardens, and even music nights. I want to move there. Ethan's mouth opened, then closed again. You mean live there permanently? For now, Nora said. Maybe 3 months to start. I need space to find myself again. He ran a hand through his hair, struggling to process it. Mom, you don't have to go away. We can take care of you. Nora smiled gently. You've taken enough care of me, Ethan. It's time I take care of myself. Her voice was calm, but there was power in it, a quiet, resolute kind. Ethan lowered his gaze. If that's what you want. It is, Nora said, and this time it's my signature, my choice. 3 months later, sunlight streamed through the wide glass windows of Nora's new apartment at Silverwood Gardens. The air smelled faintly of jasmine and ink. On her small desk, a half-finished calligraphy scroll read 4 simple words, free and at peace. Her right hand, though slower than before, moved with grace again. Every morning she joined Mr. Whitaker's class, where laughter and the soft scratch of brushes filled the room. May brought her tea during breaks, always joking that Nora's handwriting looked better than the teacher's. Nora smiled more now. She had her own rhythm: morning stretches, afternoon art, evening walks by the lake. Sometimes she caught herself humming while painting, a habit she'd forgotten she ever had. One Saturday, the center hosted an open house for families. Children ran between tables, and the elderly residents proudly showed their crafts. Nora stood by her calligraphy display when she heard a familiar voice. Mom! Ethan was there, holding a small bouquet of daisies, Leo clutching his hand. The boy ran up and hugged her waist. Grandma, Daddy said you're teaching him to write. That's right, she said, ruffling his hair. Next week we'll start with your name. Ethan looked around, taking in the art, the laughter, the calm glow on his mother's face. You seem happy, he said quietly. I am, Nora answered. For the first time in years I feel like myself. Ethan nodded, his eyes glistening. Then I think Dad would be proud. Nora looked toward the window, the afternoon sun spilling gold across her table. Maybe, she said softly, but mostly I'm proud of me. That evening, after the event ended and the guests had gone home, Nora sat on the balcony with a cup of chamomile tea. The lake shimmered under the fading light, dragonflies skimming across its surface. From the common room below, she could still hear the faint sound of piano music and laughter. For years, her life had revolved around others: her husband, her son, her grandson. Every meal cooked, every bill paid, every sacrifice made quietly in the name of love. But now, for the first time, love didn't mean losing herself. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Ethan. Mom, thank you for today. Leo won't stop talking about your art. Sloane said she wants to visit next time too. We're proud of you. Nora smiled, her eyes soft. For once, those words didn't come wrapped in guilt or obligation, they were genuine. She typed back, I'm proud of you too, Ethan. Tell Leo Grandma loves him. And tell Sloane she's always welcome. After sending the message, Nora leaned back and gazed at the stars emerging one by one. She thought of Arthur, his steady hands, his quiet laughter, the life they'd built. He would have told her this moment was long overdue. On the small table beside her lay her journal. She opened to a fresh page and wrote, Freedom isn't rebellion. It's peace. It's choosing to live, not just survive. Closing the book, she whispered into the night, Thank you, Arthur. For everything. The wind stirred the pages gently, carrying her words away, soft but certain, like ink drying on paper. And somewhere deep inside, Nora knew, this wasn't an ending. It was the beginning she'd been waiting for all along. A year later, Silverwood Gardens was hosting its annual Art Across Generations festival. Paintings, sculptures, and calligraphy adorned every wall, each piece telling the story of someone who had lived, lost, and learned to begin again. Nora stood near her display, 3 large scrolls written in her confident, flowing script. One read harmony within. Another said strength and stillness. The final one, bold and simple, bore just 2 words, begin again. Visitors lingered, admiring her work. Mr. Whitaker stood proudly beside her, telling anyone who would listen that Nora had become the heart of the community's art program. She only laughed and waved off the compliments. Then, in the crowd, she saw Ethan and Sloane, hand in hand, with Leo skipping ahead carrying a small calligraphy brush in a gift box. "Grandma," Leo called out, "look what Daddy bought me so I can write like you." Nora knelt, hugging him tightly. "Then you'll have to practice every day, young man. Calligraphy takes patience." Sloane smiled, a real one this time. "He's been begging for lessons. Maybe we could join one of your weekend workshops." "I'd love that," Nora said warmly. As they toured the exhibition together, Ethan whispered, "Mom, I get it now. Independence doesn't mean distance, it means respect." Nora met his eyes and nodded. "Exactly." When the event ended, she returned to her apartment. The evening sun glowed through her window, lighting up her writing desk. She picked up her brush, dipped it in ink, and began a new piece. Each stroke was steady and sure-rooted in loss, shaped by strength, and alive with quiet joy. Because revenge, she realized, had never been the goal. Peace was, and she had finally gracefully painted her way there. Later that night, Nora sat by her window, the moon hanging low above the quiet gardens. Her newest calligraphy piece lay before her, the ink still glistening under the soft lamplight. It read, "Peace is not given, it's created." She smiled faintly. For so long she had believed peace would come when others finally treated her right. When her son respected her, when her daughter-in-law understood her, when life stopped testing her. But peace, she now realized, began the moment she stopped waiting for permission to live as herself. Every woman, she thought, reaches a point when silence is no longer noble and endurance is no longer love. That point is not the end, it's the beginning. Her phone buzzed again. This time, a picture from Ethan. Leo was proudly showing his first calligraphy strokes, uneven, messy, but full of life. The caption read, "He says Grandma taught him the most important thing, never give up." Tears filled Nora's eyes, not from sadness but from the beautiful fullness of it all. The pain, the betrayal, the rediscovery, it had all led here, to this quiet, complete moment. She whispered to herself, maybe forgiveness isn't forgetting. Maybe it's freeing yourself to move forward. Turning off the lamp, Nora looked once more at her artwork, then out into the night. The wind carried the scent of jasmine and new beginnings. And to everyone watching this story, she'd say, don't wait for someone else to hand you peace, create it. Find your own strength, your own joy, and your own life no matter your age. Because starting over isn't just possible, it's art. Like, share, and tell us, what does peace mean to you?